Okay, so I'm really excited to have everyone joining us today. Let me make sure I got my settings right. Okay, so this is our second virtual workshop for the home and outdoor living shows. Yesterday, we made a more subtle version of our bloom block, showing you those here. Today, we are going to do a different block. We're going to be working with a stencil that's got the Texas home. So my name is Rebecca Warriner. I am the owner of AR Workshop in Cypress. We are a boutique do-it-yourself workshop. So things like this porch sign or these chunky knit blankets behind us, this cable knit blanket on the sofa here, we teach you how to make all of those in the workshop. So I'm really thrilled to get the privilege to come do this workshop with y'all today. It is a beautiful Saturday morning, and I can think of nothing better than to create something and get to look at in your home, knowing that you put your love and care and attention into it. So I'm going to help you go through the process to do our Texas home block today. Now, if you have your kit that you ordered from our website, go ahead and open up that box. Hopefully you already opened it up and you got to dig around in there like it was Christmas. If you haven't, open that up and I'm going to tell you what you've got inside there. You should have a plain block. Your block will be plain stained with our stone color, a gray stain. It's already been sanded. It's already been stained. You're going to have a stencil. You might have the bloom stencil. You could have our Texas grown bluebonnet stencil. You might have the But First coffee stencil. You might have the Texas home stencil. You're also going to have some tools in there. You're going to have a set of gloves if you'd like to keep your hands neat and clean. In my world, messy hands are happy hands, so gloves if you need them. You also have a selection of 3 paints. These are the ones we used on our bloom block from yesterday, and I'm going to go ahead and just use those again today so that my blocks all have a cohesive look to them. You also have some other tools. You have a container that is labeled primer. Set those aside. We'll use those at the right point. And then you have some makeup sponges. These are going to be used for our paint applicators. You've got a clean foam brush that's going to be used with our primer, and you've got some sandpaper. That's everything that's in your kit. There are 2 things that you might need that I did not include. One, if you have a fan, a small fan, a hairdryer, I love my little Ryobi Tools battery powered fan. I've got that setting off to the side just to speed the drying process along, but most of the things we're going to do today will dry rather quickly. And also, if you have something that's got a sharp point, you can find a safety pin, open that up carefully and use that sharp pointy end of the safety pin. If you have a sewing pin, a T-pin, you can also use a paper clip opened up, again, being careful to get rid of that appropriately so it doesn't get on the floor and step on anyone. We use something called a scaler. It is a dental pick. They're all clean in our workshop, and no, you don't get to come in and, get that out of your teeth. So we have those tools. If you can find some of those things in your house, something pointy and possibly a fan or a hair dryer, then you can get those and we'll use those at a little bit later point. So I'm excited to go through this process with you. I already got this block started because I wanted you to see what the shape of this stencil looks like. We're going to do something that we did not do yesterday with our bloom block. I'm going to show you a little bit about reading the stencil and transferring the stencils. When you're ordering your kit, I should also say it's not too late to order a kit. If you're just coming upon this class and you don't have any of these supplies, you don't have this kit yet, you can go to our website, arworkshop.com/Cypress, scroll down to the DIY to go button, click on that button and you'll see an option on there to order a kit for the home and outdoor living shows. Click on that button and you'll be able to place your order. You can pick it up in the workshop, you can have it shipped. You can also specify if you want a particular stencil. If you want But First coffee or the bloom or the Texas home or the blue bonnets, you can write it in there and I'll give you appropriate paint colors based on the design that you pick. This is what you would get if you ordered the Texas home block. It's just a big sheet of stencil paper with some transfer tape stuck to the back. When you're looking at this, you might think, okay, and I'm supposed to do what with this? The reason I want to show you this is when you're working with stencils, there is a step where you're actually removing the stencil from the backing. That's called weeding, like pulling out the weeds from your yard. I don't know that I can get this close enough and in the right light so that you can see there actually is a design cut out in there the design is this. When we read this stencil, you're going to use your pointy object, whether that's the safety pen, paper clip, a sewing pen, a needle, anything like that. And you're going to work on your stencils from the outside to the inside. When you do a project with us at AR Workshop Cypress, we always cut the stencil to fit the size of the block upon which that stencil is going to be placed. So you're going to start at the outside of the stencil and look for the first cut line. Take your pointy tip, and I'm going to dig right up underneath this stencil. And I'm actually going to try to save this Texas shape because that's how I got this guy. So I'm going to lift this up and I'm going to carefully peel this off, but I see that I've got the word home in here. You can use your pick and hold down these letters as you're lifting the stencil off. Now, if you have a stencil that's got a lot of intricate designs, for example, the flowers at the top of this porch sign, going to have lots of little bits on the inside, lots of little bits on the outside. Go slowly, get an extra light, get a flashlight, or put your phone up on a stand or something so that you can see really clearly, because you'll have a lot more pieces that you're going to be worrying about, making sure you don't take them up, that they are left behind. So as I'm going, I am using my pick to keep my letters down so that I end up with that home still here. And I've got this one little piece. That's what I placed on here. I just like to use all sides of a project. I'm a pretty frugal person. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this on the back of my bloom block that we made. Why not use both sides of the block if we have it? And I'm gonna go ahead and put this one on a little bit cattywampus, just why not? Let's make it fun. I have the insides of these letters that I need to pick out and place down there as well. There's not really a super easy way. There's no secret trick to doing that. You can kind of fold the stencil a little bit and you can get your point up underneath and then just lift it off and place it approximately where it should go. I have become an imperfectionist as I've made many, many, many more DIY projects over the last, 15, 20 years or so, which just means when something happens that I didn't plan on it happening, it's a beautiful oops, and I find a way to incorporate that beautiful oops into the fun of the design. So don't worry too much if your center of your E isn't exactly perfect. It looks pretty darn good to me. So now we actually have two parts of this block that we can use. We have the home and the centers of the letters that we took off, but we also have this regular stencil. So I'm going to take the stencil that I included in the kit, and it has transfer tape stuck to the back of it. The transfer tape holds the stencil in place so that we can take it off of the backing. I'm going to remove the transfer tape from the back of the stencil paper. It is different than masking tape. It's different than painter's tape. It has a different level of adhesion. So if you're thinking, oh, I just got some tape in the garage I can use, just be careful, because you certainly don't want to splinter your wood. You don't want it to be too sticky. I'm going to go ahead and place this right on top. When you're using the transfer tape, you're always going to want to seal it from the center to the outside, working out the air bubbles, going over to the design edge to edge. Now, as we mentioned yesterday, if you have a design like these little flowers that's much more intricate, you might want to use smaller pieces of transfer tape. You might even want to tear these up into little pieces. It takes more time to put little pieces on, but it is much easier to take small pieces off of your project than to be trying to pull off huge sheets. So I'm going to go ahead and just use some of this extra that I have to secure this stencil so that I can peel this. And we'll make this block and we'll sell it in the workshop. So come on in and visit us and you can shop around. Also, while we're going, if you have a chance to put your email in the chat window, and once this workshop is over, we will do a drawing for a half-price project from all the names that are in the chat window. And at the end of the home show, we will do a drawing of everyone who has purchased one of our DIY kits and we will do a half price project to a random person who's ordered one of our DIY kits. The kits are available to purchase through the end of October. The videos will be available through the Home and Outdoor Living Show on their page through October 4th. So if you order one after those videos are posted, then I will include some written directions on how to proceed with the project. But I want to give you as much time as possible to do these. So let's work on these stencils. So we've got this, we've put the tape on it. We're going to need to separate the blue stencil from the backing. Whenever you do that here, we like to do it upside down. We do it upside down because if you do have a piece that has lots of little pieces of tape and you try to rub over the front, you got to make sure that you don't lift up those pieces of tape. How much easier is it just to rub over the back? Use your fist, use a hard block. You can use anything, just pressing it down. And then I'll use the one that has the lots of little tape. So I have a few more steps to show you. When we separate a stencil from the backing, do it upside down. Keep the blue part, the stencil paper, down on the table and just bend the backing corner up a little bit. And instead of doing a pulling of the backing, you're actually just going to push it. Just press down and push and roll this off. We're doing that because we don't want to lose these little bits. Now let's see if I can get some of them to stick here. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so when you're unrolling this, if you see any blue stencil paper sticking to the backing, very easy to fix. Try not to touch too much in here. The oils from your fingers will get on here and then it won't stick to your practice nicely. Just roll this white paper back, press it back onto the tape and keep going. I'm gonna press down as I'm rolling to prevent that from happening again. There we go. And then I'm going to place this on my block. Now, I have one side, I already did this Texas home. The back of my block, I went ahead and I did a quick dry brush technique. I'm going to show you how we did that once we do this side of the block. So stay tuned. Getting this transferred over to our block is rather simple. Again, the size of the stencil paper is going to match up with the size of the block. The design is centered on the stencil, so all I've got to do is make sure that the stencil paper matches up with the size of the block. Secure it from the middle, working your way to the outside. Press down over that design, nice and firm. And then we need to get the tape off. When you're taking the tape off, you put the tape on. I put this tape on one small piece at a time. I want to take it off one small piece at a time. So when you are doing stencil work, whether you're doing a wall in your house, if you're stenciling a patio table, if you get a huge roll of transfer tape, for example, and you stretch it out across something and it's really easy to put on, when you go back and you try to remove that transfer tape from a more intricate stencil, the bigger the ball of tape you're taking off, the stickier it is, and the more likely it's going to pull something back up. So that's why we like to use the small pieces. And when you take the tape off, use small pieces one at a time, taking the tape off. So I'm just going to roll these off quite simply, making sure that all of my letters, find the pieces that are on top, make sure all my letters stay put. Okay, so I've got my home here. I've got the negative version of the stencil here. Thinking about process, what we're going to do, we're going to paint over this. So when we remove the stencil paper, we'll have the shape of the Texas painted in the color that we choose, and the home and the border will be left with the white. When we do the back, we're going to paint the block, and the shape of the Texas is going to stay with the stain of that we chose, the stone stain. The home will be painted. Again, Texas will be the shape of this, the color of the background right now. We need to glue these stencils down. This is a step that we always do in our workshop. We use a primer that is going to seal the edges of our stencil so that the paint won't bleed up underneath. It just makes sure that the stencil is, all the edges are nice and sealed and tight. If you don't, then it's likely that the paint is just going to get sucked up underneath. The wood has bumps and ridges and grooves, and if you don't seal up those edges, then you will just have some fuzzier looks to your stencil, which again, beautiful loop. If you forget to prime something, that's fine. If you have a huge wall and you are stenciling a wall in a bedroom or something like that, maybe you have a reusable stencil that you were able to purchase online or somewhere, you may not want to prime because you'd have to prime and let the stencil sit there, let the primer dry. So that's where a case where you might just say, no big deal, just going to put the paint straight on there. So again, make that decision for yourself. We like to do it on all of our projects because our stencils can get put in front of the fan. The way we apply the primer, it's a smush and smooth. This primer is a very, very thin coat. I'm smushing down over the edges to make sure that it's nice and stuck to the project. And then I'm going to smooth to remove any excess. If your primer looks pretty, your paint looks pretty. If your primer is bumpy and lumpy, your paint will be bumpy and lumpy. Maybe that's the look you're going for. Just know that when your primer goes on, it should be a nice, thin, smooth coat. I am going to go ahead and prime this word home. I want those edges to be really crisp. Anything with that beautiful state of Texas on it, we want to make it look amazing. And I'm going to go ahead and put a layer of primer around the edge of my block as well. Only because when you think about how many layers we're putting on this block, we have the wood, we've added a layer of primer. Once we add a layer of paint, there's some thickness there. If there's a spot where we don't have the primer, sometimes you can see that on the wood, and I just want to make it as smooth as possible. I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to prime this side. I'm going to hold it because I've got the other side is wet. Again, I'm only putting a tiny bit of primer on here. That's enough for this whole block. I'm going to go ahead and smush around the edges, smushing and smoothing, pressing gently over the letters. I've sealed up the edges. And then I'm going to go back and smooth to make sure that my paint is nice. My primer looks beautiful. There we go. Now, one thing I do want to show you, there's always opportunities to learn with every project. You know, wood was a living thing before it became our project. Every piece of wood has imperfections. If you can see right here underneath this M, we've got a little air bubble. It's just a groove in the wood. There's a little knot or something there and the primer went underneath it. My primer is already dry. I'm going to go ahead and just push that primer out with my finger or with a pick and just pick up that excess. But that might be a spot where I'll have to do a little bit more touching up. I'll show you how we do that. So I'm going to let this dry in front of my fan. It'll take it just another minute or two. And I want to talk to you about paint colors and how we're going to do the painting technique. Let me go ahead and prime this one while we're going. When we're picking out your paint colors, I've picked out blues and greens today. I also picked out the Aggie Maroon because whoop, why wouldn't you put Aggie Maroon on something? Reds, yellows, and oranges tend to have a lot of pigment. So if you are painting a project with red, yellow, and orange tones, with those warm tones, some colors you may find just tend to be more watery. It's just because there's a lot more pigment in some of those deeper, darker colors. You'll have to use multiple coats. If you're going to if you've got a beautiful white wall and you want to put a red stencil on there, be prepared to do a couple of layers of paint with that red. You'll probably have a little bit better one cover success if you pick a non-red color. We've noticed that in our workshop when we're doing our Christmas projects, the first layer of red looks okay. Second layer of red looks great. By the time we get to that third soft, thin layer, it's a bright, true, vibrant red. So keep that in mind. All right, so let's work on this side. Again, we're going to paint the Texas. We'll peel this off. We'll take off the home, and our background is going to be this whitewash. I'm going to go with, I think I'm going to do a little bit of a fade here. I'm going to use our surf green and our reflecting pool. These are the same colors we used on our bloom block. Again, this is just showing you a lighter, softer, more muted color palette here. It's going to be a lot more bold on the white. And then on the back, we will do something completely different. When you get these kits in the mail, you might have screw top lids if we need to ship it. If you pick it up in the workshop, we'll just have it in these nice little containers. Your paint may have settled, so you should probably plan on mixing that up a little bit. You can shake the container or you can just stir it with a toothpick or something. I'm gonna go ahead and just use my point just to mix these colors up. Paint does separate, especially when it goes in the Texas postal system. Okay, I'm gonna do a little blend. We're gonna do a fade. We're gonna do our lighter color at the top, our darker color at the bottom, and then we're gonna blend it across where the words home are. You've got these reusable makeup wedges. I like to hold them at the pointy top. Use the flat side as your brush if you're into reusing and recycling, which we try to reuse as much as we can in the workshop. Once you've used this, you can rinse it out, dry it out, use it again for another project, cut the bottom off, cut the tip off, and use it as many times as you need. I'm going to work my way from the bottom to the top. How much paint do you need? That's a question we often get asked. Not much, very, very little. You want to have a very thin layer of paint. There is no dripping or goopy piling up of paint here. If you can pick your paint up and it's dripping and it's running off of your sponge, you probably have too much paint. Wipe it off, super simple. I'm going to take this and I'm going to go just about to the bottom of the word home. How I'm applying the paint with a smushing motion, no wiping. When we put the primer on this block, we seal up the wood. So the paint is no longer soaking into the wood. The paint is just gonna sit right on top. I'm gonna go back in with my reflecting pool color, which is a really fun, soft, muted, kind of blue aqua color. And I'm just going to smush this right on top. Again, it's a very thin layer. You should actually be able to see the shape of the stencil coming through the paint. If you can't tell what is underneath your paint, you might have too much. When that happens, just go back over with an area of your sponge that might not have as much paint and soak some up. So we've got our green, we've got our aqua at the top. We're going to go ahead and mix and blend these colors in the middle. Take a sponge. You can use either one. Paint blends when it's wet. So if you let the paint get too dry, then you might need to reapply another layer and blend that. I'm going to just go back and forth across this seam where these are and soften. I'm going to go back in with this brush and I'm just going to soften to smudge and smooth that transition, blending these together. Soft and easy. You can still see the outline of the Texas. You can still see the outline of the word home. Just going to make sure I didn't miss any areas around the points. I want to soften that transition a little bit more. And there's no wrong way. It's up to you how much paint you want to apply, how much color you want, how you want that transition to appear. Looks a little interesting. The way we're going to peel the stencil off is going against the grain. The grain of the wood is the lines of the wood. So many of you may already know that, but I always like to provide a little bit more education. The stripes of the wood are going across. That's going to be the grain of the wood. When we peel against the grain, we are going to peel down. If you peel a stencil with the grain, especially if you're doing any furniture that's already been used, anything that's already been weathered, and you peel in the direction of the grain, it's very likely the wood is going to splinter up and stick to the stencil paper. You'll have more repair work to do, more touch-ups to do. So just be aware of that. What I like to do on these little projects, because I can actually hold this block up with my hand, I'm going to hold it and I'm going to keep it upside down just because I want to make sure the stencil doesn't fall back down and touch my wood. So we've got a starting point there. We still need to dig out the word home from there, but I'm actually going to let that paint set up a little bit more while we work on the back. I find that taking the middles, the letters out is easier once the paint is a little bit drier, for the main reason that if I drop that little piece, it's not going to cause more damage and more mess on here. So in your kit, you have your sponges, your sandpaper, your paints, your things. You'll want to make sure you've got that little safety pin, toothpick, something like that here. I think I've seen a few people pop in since we got started. I want to go ahead and just revisit one thing for you. If you have your kit, go ahead and pull that out. And when you go back to watch this video from the beginning, we'll be able to get you through this point. We've already peeled and placed the stencil on here. Add your name, your email to the chat box, and we'll capture that and we'll do a drawing for a half-price project at the end of this workshop from all the email addresses that are in the chat. If you haven't ordered a kit yet, you can still do that. We can ship it to you, or you can order it in the workshop, and this video will be available on the Home and Outdoor Living Show site through October 4th. So make sure you go and do that. Oh, and anyone who orders a kit, when the shows are all over, we'll do another drawing for a half-price project. Okay, now what we're gonna do on the back side, I told you at the beginning how I did this little dry brush technique, and I said, but hold on, I'm gonna show you how we do that. We're gonna work on that here. It can be so simple. Sometimes you see some of these paint techniques and they're a little bit overwhelming, so I wanna simplify this for you. We're gonna use the tools that we already have. We already primed our stencil, so we have our primer brush. If you have another foam brush, you could use that. I have just a foam brush from another project because we have plenty of those in our workshop. So I'm just gonna use a clean and dry foam brush. And I'm actually gonna do a brush technique over this stencil, painting over the background, over the word home, and we're just gonna do a simple 2-color stencil on the back with the stone stain and the white paint. Doing this as a kind of like a dry brush technique. It's so easy, guys. It can be so simple. We're just gonna get it on here, kind of messy. We're gonna go back and we're gonna do a little sanding. I'm probably not gonna go all the way to the edges. I'm not gonna worry too much if there's streaky marks and brush strokes. Really simple. And then a rag. If you have an old t-shirt, an old dish towel, anything like that, you can let this paint sit, let it get a little bit tacky. And I'm going to show you a distressing technique that we like to do in the workshop. It's fun. It does take, I'll say it would be more of an advanced technique. If you're trying to create something that looks like it's really been sitting outside, that it's really, really weathered. Once the paint gets a little bit tacky, looks like it needs to get a little bit drier here. I'm going to just pick a small section right in here. I'm going to apply a little bit more paint here. You know how when you draw on a dry erase board and you marker on it and then you write over it and it actually pulls the marker off? That's what we're doing here. We let the paint get dry, a little tacky, put another little bit of paint on top of it, let it get tacky. Then I'm going to take my rag and I'm going to lightly scrub over this section, and it's going to peel the paint back off. And it's going to have it, these little chunks of distressing, making it just look like it's a little bit more weathered. And then at the end, once we take the stencil off, we're going to go back and sand over. Now the paint got a little dry, so I need to add another little wet spot of paint there so that it can help pull that paint back off. I'm going to scrub and remove. See, we can start getting some of these pockets of paint off, and as long as there's a little bit of dry paint or wet paint still on my rag, then it will pull it off. If there's any that starts to get too dry, tap a little bit more with my brush. Okay, there we go. I can get the edges. Okay, so we've added a few pockets of that. Imagine if you do a 32-inch centerpiece box and you do a nice whitewash over the top of a dark barrel stain, and then put these scrubbies on, and then put a nice saying or a nice design or words, and it really does look like it came straight out of the barn. Taking this stencil off, we only have one piece. We only have the big text. So I'm gonna take my pick and we'll flip it over and we'll take the word home out of the back as well. We wanna do a lot less digging and more just trying to lift the edge of the point underneath the stencil. And then we'll lift the stencil up. So I don't want to gouge the wood. I certainly don't want to put any marks into that. And when you're peeling this off, if you can peel it, I like to get the corners up. And we're actually going to try to peel it also against the grain. And I'm releasing my corners so that it will be easier to take off here. The grain, let's see, the grain's going this way, so I'm going to want to peel it against the grain. There's a few little pieces that got left behind in that M. It's okay. If the stencil paper tears when you're taking it off, it's okay. It's just paper. Paper's made to tear. There we go. going to go in here with my pick, and I'm again just going to lift up the parts of the stencil that I need to remove. There's a little touching up I'll need to do around the M. That was that spot I showed you before where the wood had a little knot and the primer sneaked up underneath there. I've got some tricks for that. We like to tell everyone when they come into AR workshops like this, there is nothing you can do we can't fix. There's always more stencil paper and there's always more wood. So there is nothing you can do that we can't fix in the project, in the workshop. Okay. So that's fun, minus this little blobby down here. Touching up. Every project needs touch-ups. I'm going to use this as a kind of scrubber. And I'm just going to scratch off a little bit of the paint. The primer's got up underneath that stencil. It makes it really easy to come off because the paint's really just sitting on top of that primer. So I'm just going to etch it a little bit without causing too much damage. My wood. And if I needed to, I could go in with an extra little bit of sandpaper and I could touch that up. But I am going to let mine be perfectly imperfect because I am going to go back over once this paint really does set up, and I'm going to sand it to make it look a little bit more distressed. Now let's flip it over and let's do the back side. I love this stencil because it's a 2-for-1. So anytime I can do 2 sides of a project, I love that. When we make porch signs, we give everyone a discount when they come back and do the back of their porch sign because you already bought the wood. And same thing with these. If you do the Texas kit, you've got 2 blocks in one. Pick different colors, do holiday colors, do your favorite colors. Okay, there we go. So our home, we've got the color blending. We've got a little dry brush technique on that. This one, we've got the negative of the stencil. We've added a little bit of extra distressing. I'm going to take my sandpaper. Sandpaper makes every oops a beautiful oops. Sanding with the grain of the wood. The grain of the wood are the lines. So your sandpaper is going to follow the lines of the wood. I'm just going to scuff this up a little, especially where that M is. Seeing if I can fix that. I'm just going to soften some of these edges. All right, there we go, a little bit smoother. It's very perfect, it's very pretty, but I am gonna just give it a little bit of texture. I want the Texas to look like it's just a little bit older. Tiny, tiny little difference. So there we go. Now all that's left for you to do is clean up. If you come make a project with us at AR Workshop Cypress, you leave the cleanup to us. We'll take care of doing all of that for you. So go ahead and get those email addresses in the chat. We will send an email out as soon as we get the report back of all of the addresses that were submitted. And I hope that you'll be able to join us again. We will be doing tomorrow on Sunday morning, we'll be doing But First Coffee. How appropriate is that? And we will show off our different versions of this project. Now I did know, if y'all remember, I did the home here. And because I'm an Aggie, I got to do my maroon. I'm going to do one last thing and then I'll really finish it up. I keep thinking I'm done. I'm going to go ahead and I am just going to sponge right around this edge with this maroon. But this is where you can see the first layer of red. Kind of looks pink. Once you let this paint set up, you can go back and you can get a little bit more depth to your color. And I am going to completely color this block with this maroon. Can't have too much of that. We are licensed to do A&M designs. So any A&M project logo, things like that we can do. We can do A&M cornhole boards and cutting boards and porch signs. And they are all going to be the official Aggie maroon color, or Aggie gray, or Aggie black, or Aggie white. So that is always a fun way to bring a little school spirit in there. So look at how easy this is. I just need to get a full coverage. I can use these little brushes. I'm gonna get a nice solid coverage on here. Peel this up. I'm gonna lift the corners. I'm I like to hold these little projects upside down so that I can make sure it isn't going to fall back. We've got the middle of the O, lifting that up. Gonna grab the middle of the E. And there you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed our Texas home blocks. We will look forward to seeing you again. Enjoy the rest of the home and outdoor living shows. And if you get a chance, pop by and see us at AR Workshop Cypress. We're located on the west side of Cypress, kind of in the Fry and 290 corridor. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Stay safe.